So I'm handing over to my colleague Sonia Schmidt, who is the team leader for our solutions unit at the Climate Action Accelerator for our first panel of the day.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this first panel of the day, where we're going to be discussing food aid and nutrition. So food aid and agriculture account for around 50% of the carbon footprint of the international humanitarian sector. When we look at the global food system, it's responsible for around a third of global carbon emissions. For example, rice alone is responsible for 1.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions and 10% of agricultural emissions. Food production and distribution is not only responsible for carbon impacts, but also has, of course, other environmental impacts, such as biodiversity, water use, and so forth. Depletion of soils is a huge issue. So the whole topic of food is really one of the key topics when we look at reducing the climate and other environmental impacts. On the other hand, we also already see impacts of climate change on the production of food. So droughts, lack of water, again, the depletion of soils. So there's also a question of building resilient supply chains to ensure supply in the future, and also building resilience of communities. And just to make things even more complicated, we also have growing needs. A growing number of populations rely on food aid. So how do we bring all these difficult topics together? So I'm very happy to moderate a really great panel. I think we managed to find quite a diverse number of experts, where we on the one hand want to discuss, so how can we develop this capacity of humanitarian organizations to meet growing needs? How can we build more resilient supply chains? And also how can we shift towards more sustainable options to reduce the impact? So I'm very happy to have with me today a great panel of speakers. So we have Kathrine, who's the Outgoing Environmental and Climate Change Advisor at ICRC. She held that role since 2017 and notably led and really drove the construction of the ICRC's environmental and carbon roadmap, and also helped the organization to adopt very ambitious climate targets. She's an environmental management consultant and sustainability expert with more than 20 years of experience in the sector. We have Thompson online. He's the Director of Supply Chain Strategic Engagement at the World Food Programme, and he's responsible for charting the way forward for WFP's supply chains of the future. He has been with WFP for more than 20 years, of more than 25 years, of which 20 years in the field. So also a great experience in the field. And then we have Tewodros Asresehegn, who is Senior Program Manager at GIZ, the German Organization for Development Cooperation in Ethiopia, and also a PhD candidate at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. We're very happy that he actually managed to make it here because there were some train issues. So glad you made it. And he's currently leading the GIZ climate sensitive, the GIZ project on climate sensitive for land management project, ensuring sustainable land management in the highlands of Ethiopia. So really a practitioner who can talk about what it means to implement more sustainable agricultural practices directly in the field with farmers. And then we have Julien Chabanet, who is the Plumpy Field Franchise Coordinator for Nutriset. He studied quality engineering, holds an MBA in CSR management, and had held a number of positions at Nutriset over the last 10 years. Is now coordinating the Plumpy Field network of franchises, which includes 10 ready-to-use food manufacturers. So one of the key suppliers, as we already heard before, in the field. And then last but not least, we have Bastien Tiberghien. She has more than 20 years experience in multinational companies, notably with Nestle and Nespresso, where she held leadership roles in procurement and supply chain, and also led major initiatives to reduce the environmental footprint, promote sustainable innovation, and also engage suppliers. Thank you very much for being with us today. So I'm going to start with Kathrine. We already heard from ICRC, from Gilles this morning. So, digging a bit deeper into the topic of food aid. So first of all, we would be interested to know, so what is the importance of food aid for ICRC? And also, what are the solutions and also the challenges you identified in reducing the impact?
Great. Hi everyone, and I'm really happy to be here with you today. It's a pleasure to see all of you, some faces that I know and many others that I don't. So it's fantastic to be here. Indeed, why is food aid important from the ICRC's perspective when it comes to our climate and environment roadmap? I'm sorry, I'm reading my paper, but I'm not good with numbers. When we did our baseline in 2018, our carbon footprint baseline, what we saw is that procurement of products, food, relief items, and others that we use in our humanitarian programs, they represented 3/4 of the total of our greenhouse gas emissions. And if we look at food alone, that contributes to 34%, contributed in 2018 to 34% of our global footprint. So I think that's probably one of the main reasons why food aid is so important in our roadmap and figured highly in the high on the agenda of the topics that we examined when we developed our environmental roadmap at the ICRC. I do want to add a couple of more points that go a bit beyond carbon footprint. I think Gilles referred to it very well this morning at the ICRC. We, of course, have our goal to reduce by 50% the greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. But we also look at waste and how to reduce the waste that we generate and how to manage it better in the field. And of course, packaging is a specific issue for food distribution. Packaging is key to ensure that, or to guarantee the quality of the food that is distributed. So it's not something that we can do without, but it's very often plastic packaging. And so that means, or that contributes to plastic pollution, air pollution, and other issues locally. So it's also something that we looked at when we developed our environmental roadmap. The third aspect, or key aspect that the ICRC looks at when we talk about environmental sustainability is responsible procurement. And that is simply because we've realized that a lot of social and environmental risks for the institution lies within our supply chain. When it comes to food, I probably only have to mention palm oil for you to see the variety of risks that exist within our food supply chains, from social risk to deforestation and other environmental risks in the supply chain. So that is also why food is or was one of the key thematics that we looked at in our environmental roadmap. Now, when it comes to solutions, I'm not going to detail everything that was discussed, and we will. My colleagues are in the process of publishing the environmental roadmaps. You will have probably before the end of the year a good overview about the solutions that we've put in. But maybe just to flag that there are, I think, two main types of solutions or actions that are critical in reducing the environmental impact of food aid. One is to think about alternatives to rice. Rice is the one food product that contributes heavily to the ICRC's footprint. And we know that there are alternatives, other types of cereals that we can distribute. Of course, these alternatives need to be acceptable, both from a cultural perspective and from a nutritional perspective. So it's not to say that we will shift all the rice to sorghum or any other type of cereal tomorrow, but we need to look at yes, alternatives. The other one, which we've talked about already, but I do want to flag, is working with suppliers, being able to select products and suppliers that have themselves in place environmental policies, environmental actions, and decrease their footprint. It seems a faraway goal, I think, today for many humanitarian organizations. But in the case, for example, of palm oil, this is already something that the ICRC does, where we engage and look at purchasing in priority RSPO certified palm oil. So it is something that is feasible and doable, and that we need to develop in the ICRC, but also as a sector more widely. Maybe just a couple of words on some of the learnings that I take away from the whole environmental roadmap development at the ICRC. One is that what we see from the field, from many colleagues, is that best practices are already being implemented. I mean, we have examples of waste management and reverse logistics in Colombia. We have examples of local seed multiplication initiatives in Ethiopia, about agricultural, sustainable agriculture in the Sahel. I mean, a very, very large diversity of best practices. So we know it's feasible to integrate both an approach that focuses on answering needs and protecting the environment, but it's really about how do we accelerate and standardize those best practices in our operations. And standardize for me does not mean that we will have to replicate exactly the same across all geographies, but it simply means that we have to have that mindset of needs and environmental impact when we look at the programs and what we need to implement. So a more flexible probably approach as well. The link between mitigation and adaptation or building resilience of populations is also something that and I'll finish on that, thank you, is also something that I do want to flag here. We often oppose what needs to happen to reduce our footprint with what needs to happen to build the resilience of populations. But I think across all of the solutions, but particularly when it comes to food aid, those solutions actually go more hand in hand and do not oppose. I mean, I'm sure you will come to this, but when we talk about sustainable agriculture, it can only be sustainable if it also helps build the resilience of the populations with whom that we want to support, with whom we work. So yeah, those are some of the learnings, and leave you with one question, I think, which is that at the ICRC, we've seen a trend to go from in-kind distribution to cash-based interventions. And I think all the work and the reflections that we are having today on food aid is something that we will have to replicate as a sector into our cash-based interventions, with, of course, a more indirect capacity to act and influence the solutions and the impacts. Thank you very much.
We're going to move on to from WFP. And Thomas, how does WFP deal with this sort of dilemma of the challenge of greening the supply chain, and at the same time growing needs to actually distribute food aid? So what are the solutions? How far are you in the operationalization? And what are your experiences with that difficult question?
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Am I on mic? I'm unmuted on my side. I can hear myself. You can hear me. Okay. I'm first of all, good morning, and thank you for having me on the panel. I think, like Kathrine, I'm also outgoing in terms of WFP, as I'll be leaving WFP in a couple of weeks. There's certainly huge challenges, and certainly with an organization the size of WFP, to change the way we do our business, it's a large ship to turn around. I really, many of the things that Kathrine was talking about resonate with the changing way we're looking at things in our operation as well. I think I shocked the meeting last year when I basically said, if we're trying to green our supply chain, the best thing we can do is not respond. And of course, everyone went aback by that. But that's really a plug for more resilience work that we do. And I'm really glad that Tewodros is in the room to talk about some of the work that he's doing in Ethiopia, because those are the kinds of things that we should be getting our heads wrapped around. A lot of what we're doing now, there's a misperception that there are highly technological solutions to a lot of the supply chain problems as we green. And we find ourselves in a real dilemma that we have increase in operations, responding to more emergency environmental crises, and at the same time under pressure to try to reduce our carbon footprint. So there are a number of things that we're actually doing right now. A lot of them involve, we'll hear this a lot, supply chain optimization. It's a very buzzword talking about localization, but it's actually very, very impactful. We're doing things to improve waste management, recycling, repurposing cargo, and trying as best as possible changing modes of transport, looking at how we can best do that. Reduction of air, increase of rail, for example. Use of clean energy in some of our operations, the use of electrified and solar-powered warehousing. We run our shipping now entirely on approved low-sulfur fuels, for example, and better procurement planning in terms of the cycle of when you purchase, where you purchase, eventually there will be other technological solutions, but they're years away. I mean, these are solar-powered blimps, sailing vessels, solar-powered electric trucks, et cetera, et cetera. But for the time being, those are really not the big things. It's really, mitigation in terms of reduction of post-harvest losses, introduction of more diverse foods. And Kathrine spoke of that as well, and that very much resonates. There are foods that we can procure, and there are foods that we can purchase locally that have a far less impact on the environment. And Kathrine spoke as well quite a bit about soil degradation, and that's another incredible, big problem that we're having. Is that if we start procuring and providing incentives to procure more diverse foods, we contribute to soil health as well. Adaptation and resilience building, I think Tewodros will begin to cover some of this. Soil and water conservation are huge parts of this. And for us, really a shift in the last, say, 4 or 5 years from shipping large quantities across the globe to localizing. We purchase about 50% now locally. That's near a 70% increase since 2019. We started looking at that. And the big part of that is trying to look at how do we increase our work with smallholder farmers who are more likely to respond to pushes for diversity in crops. So, I mean, that does a couple of things for us as well. There's huge social benefits to putting finances into small local markets than there are to providing funding for large shippers. So those are a number of the things that we're trying to do while keeping an eye on some of those, again, sort of flashier, more technological solutions. There's many things that we can do and we are doing now to change the way we do our business.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So we're going to move on to Tewodros. I find it's quite interesting because we talk a lot about, greening, the supply chain, regenerative agriculture. It's a big buzzword at the moment, sustainable agriculture. But what does it actually mean? So we're super happy to have Tewodros here today. So Tewodros, what does it actually mean, sustainable agriculture? And how can it help to reduce emissions, but also other environmental impacts of farming? And what are some of the learnings of the very practical projects that you're helping to implement?
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be part of this discussion today. So I had a lot of hiccups yesterday while traveling to Geneva. Thank you very much. I just will try to use some slides. I think the photos would speak more than my words. So I think this is where the situation that we are now in many of our agro-ecosystems. In the Ethiopian highland, land degradation is really a severe problem in terms of agricultural production, productivity, declining production. And then this coupled with increasing population is really putting a lot of pressure to the existing ecosystems. I think this also represents where we are now globally. Recently, a lot of study shows that 52% of the agricultural lands are degraded. So this exactly shows where we are now. And this chaos is also creating kind of a vicious cycle. The more the agricultural lands are affected by degradation, the more encroachment into protected areas, as you can see. And then a lot of floods are destroying the farm fields. So this is, I think, has three important influences. One, socially, as you can see, farmers could not even connect themselves. The social network is already broken because of all these gullies created, and big amount of soil is being washed. This soil is kind of a carbon stock. The largest carbon stock is always the soil. So the more degradation, the more it's being exposed, and then all the soil is washed down to the water bodies. As you can see, all the Rift Valley lakes we have are significantly affected. Most of them, they are drying up, and all the livelihood are affected because the fish, wherever they are affected by this siltation, eutrophication of the nutrients washed down into the lakes. And we have many of our lakes also affected by water hyacinth plant growing there and affecting the whole fish and livelihood of the farmers. So having this really stress, the government and with support from development organizations are taking a lot of initiative to reverse this because this is a very important aspect of it. Unless this is reversed, then it will have a lot of pressure into the overall country's economy. Next. The good news is this land degradation can be reversed. That's a big, important lesson that we learn. As you can see, this is just from Google Earth, the same spot that we've been working on. This was when we started in 2006. And then in 2021, the same place at the same time, you can see how much land restoration could also regenerate and also support the livelihood. This is the end of the dry season, March. But you can see farmers are producing twice in a year. So this has a great implication also into humanitarian organizations. So humanitarian support is important. I think they have to really also engage into sustainable production, building resilience. This is, I would say, this is even hyper resilience. It's not going back to what it was, but it is even producing more and then engaging into continuous production that will have also contribution into carbon reduction and at the same time livelihood improvement. Next. The same story. This is the same community that they really have achieved success in 18 years. Of course, this is not the whole time. As you can see, from 2004 to 2012, it was going down, decreasing, but from 2012, this is where the Sustainable Land Management Program has started to work with the community, and it is completely reversed. And this tells us a lot, and these are how we call them our bright spots. That gives hope that restoration could bring back also the system and then also increase production and productivity. Now, okay, these are our bright spots. Always small is beautiful, but scale is important. So now with taking this initiative, the government is trying to engage into, to spread it into many more communities. Next slide. Yeah, with the land management program, the government has promoted this into around 3,000 communities. We call them communities who are living in a kind of watershed of 500 hectares. They share common resources. They share also their own social values. So taking all into this is what we also learn. Scaling doesn't mean that taking everything at the same time. So it's not a copy and paste. So next. So with all this, we learn all interventions does not work in all non-communities. Some of this community, like 25% of them, they were really high performing in terms of restoring their area. They managed to restore more than 85% of their area in a very short time, in 10 years' time, and others are lagging behind. So now, that's what we are doing now with Wageningen University. What are the factors? What can we learn from the successes? Why are some communities successful and then the others are not? So we have to, in our scaling, we have to learn also in terms of what ingredients are there that we can take it. You know, everything copying from one place to other will not work. But there is always a push from top that assuming that everything works everywhere. Next. The same thing we also try to observe from satellite images, biomass which has been created over the years. As you can see, some communities have really increased their biomass and others going down in 10 years' time. So these are also important lessons that we should draw for our scaling up. Next. So the big secret in here is ecological restoration alone is not enough. So it has to be linked with livelihoods of the communities that should really generate short-term and long-term benefit to the community. And it has to really work also with those communities that their products and values has to be linked to the market. So this community should get more meaning if they are getting also economic benefits. And then also their products and services are also linked to the market. That's what we learn. And important ingredient that we are looking now is also the institutional capacity is important. Leadership, I think in this first discussion I was really very much inspired that that's also what we found out. Community initiatives has to be led by local leadership. There has to be a collective consensus among the community. And that needs also a leader who can show them by doing, not by telling them. So a practice learning, and then also creating a trust, and then creating common collective consensus for this. So these are really important elements. And then communities should get also autonomy in terms of making decisions. And those plans which are coming from the top has to be reconciled with the community initiatives and interests, priorities. Otherwise, yeah, community could implement something because they are, told by programs, but what they can take as an ownership is if they are also mandated in terms of making decisions in the selection of practices, technologies, approaches, and then also try to customize into their local language and experiences. So these are the key messages that we learn out of it. And then we are trying now to engage more in terms of capacity building, leadership capacity, engagement, and participatory land management processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tewodros. So we're going to move on to Julien from what you said, to bring in basically the middle situation between the farmers and the buyers as a supplier. So we're very curious to hear what are sort of your plans, the solutions you identified, how you're already maybe planning to work on. And first, I think it would also be interesting to know what are the key agricultural products Nutrisat actually sources, and then how what have you already identified to tackle the issue?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me here. Tough to talk after this speech. So yeah, I've been working for NutriSet Group, which is the mother company of a network, a franchise network made of 10 companies, which are located in Africa, in India, in Haiti, and US and France. They are all manufacturers of plant peanut, plant sub, plant PIDOS, so different solutions, nutritional solutions to treat and prevent malnutrition. And so, yes, climate change has, very, very heavy impact on the populations, on the vulnerable populations that receive the products we manufacture. But at the same time, we buy a lot of agriculture raw materials from places where that will be affected as well. So NutriSet was built on a mandate, a company mandate, which is fighting malnutrition again, with efficient solutions. So it makes sense to work on mitigation of our environmental footprint because it has an impact, an effect. To do so, in the last few years, we've been asking ourselves how to do that. So we both worked on the mitigation and adaptation. And we did two things for both of them. First, identify quick wins. That's the easiest part. And to build a solid baseline with a diagnosis phase, which is about to be finished within the next 2 months, to decide about the most ambitious and relevant strategy for the few years ahead. And to do so, we first did a carbon footprint survey. So just to have very quick figures in mind, 1 carton of plant peanuts, which is the most symbolic product from NutriSet, 1 carton is the equivalent of 1 treatment for severe acute malnutrition for 1 kid. 1 carton is 13 kg, 13.8 kgs, and it represents 120 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. And so that gives there's a scale. And this carbon footprint survey gives us a very important information. Over this impact, 95% comes from our raw materials, 95%, and including packaging. But among this 95%, 65% come from the dairy ingredients, milk and whey, 65% of our carbon footprint of our activity. And after that, you've got 18% for the palm oil. And then the other ones are, let's say, minor. But packaging, for instance, is something very visible, and we have to fight against that. But if we take into consideration the carbon footprint first, it's quite minor. And what we did after that to get a robust baseline is we did a life cycle assessment in France on 1 carton of plant peanut manufactured in France, consumed in Yemen. And altogether, it has been assessed in addition to the climate aspect, meaning the carbon footprint. Other categories have been assessed, and like human toxicity, ecosystem quality, land use, etc., etc. And what we can see again is dairy ingredients are the highest in terms of impact on and the highest impact is the ecosystem quality. So ecosystem quality, plant peanut has more impact on that if we can compare with carbon footprint. It means that we have a lot to do, not only on carbon footprint, but on other impacts as well. So how do we work on that on the raw materials? Because we've got very, very stringent specifications, nutritional specifications, physical specifications on the finished product to make it 24 months shelf life in some tough conditions. We've got nutritional aspects which are very, very highly demanding. So how do we do that? We do two things. The first thing is to work on the current formula. To work on the current formula, meaning to work with our own suppliers. We are suppliers of humanitarian actors, but we've got our own big or small suppliers. So I mentioned some quick wins. We worked with our palm oil suppliers. And so in France, for instance, for the last 2 years, we switched all our procurement of palm oil to RSPO segregated. It is a first step. It is a quick win, but we can do much more. And so these quick wins on the current formula to work with suppliers, our own suppliers, to do more, to discuss with them what can be done easily and what should be done with a premium cost. And on a midterm, to work on other formula. Other formula, as I said, dairy ingredients are the most impactful raw materials we've got. So to reduce this impact, we need to consider going to other kinds of proteins. So we do not do that by our own, of course. We have to work with the frame, which is given by international bodies, regulatory bodies like WHO, and of course, the major consumers of this product, like WFP, UNICEF, MSF, ICF, etc., Alima, different big NGOs. So we are working on that. We've got a frame, we've got a lot to do, and the new strategy will be released within the next few months to give that more accurate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent, great. Now let's move on to Bastien, where we basically building on this sort of supplier experience, more from actually being a bit in the middle with your experience with big national companies. So I was wondering, what is your experience in trying to green food supply chains and notably working with suppliers? So how do you engage? What were the learnings from your experience actually being in this procurement function?
Yeah, thanks. Very happy to be here today. I will bring my perspective on the private sector. So my experience, I would say mostly with Nestlé, as you just mentioned. So we said that already a significant portion of the carbon footprint comes from the sourcing of ingredients. For Nestlé, it's 70%. And what was, I'll go fast, maybe just to focus more on regenerative agriculture. There are many initiatives taken at Nestlé, but the biggest one is definitely regenerative agriculture. They have invested 6 billion over several years. They will invest 6 billion. They started already. And I think that's the main focus. Why? Because soil health, as you just, I think, very well described, that's how we're going to capture CO2. So it makes a very big difference if you have a soil which is emitting CO2 or absorbing CO2. So how do we operationalize that? Bruno, that was your question. And in 2019, 2020, I was the head of a team in procurement at Nestlé, and we had these questions. So we started by defining what reg ag mean, the regenerative agriculture mean for us, and so that we share that with our suppliers. You described probably it's not only it was a bit more wide definition, I would say, because we had crop rotation. This is key. Crop cover, definitely. It's more also about reducing tillage and as well fertilizer management. We saw this morning with Joyeta that nitrogen pollution is also a quite important topic, and fertilizer is one of the main driver. So for a company of size of Nestlé, it means that it's quite complex, same for you, but there are 500,000 farmers behind. So how do we influence those? We don't have direct commercial relationship with these farmers, so we go through our suppliers. So the challenge is how to influence farming practices. And there was a kind of a balanced approach saying, are we going to use a carrot? Are we going to use a stick? We're going to use both. And probably we start with carrot, because what does it mean to have carrot? It means that we are providing finance, we finance projects with suppliers. So for me, I had 300 suppliers. I'm selecting the ones that are the more willing to go for changes, the ones that have a direct impact on their farmers. and the ones that are quite where we have a good dialogue and are important for us. So we start with them, and we initiate a dialogue. So each team lead, like me, initiated dialogues to have collaborative projects. And we offer financial and technical support. And it's not only about money. It's more about also they are willing to go for it, but how? How do we do that? And I'll give some examples. So we also use the stick because I think we mentioned also this morning, it's a compulsory world, I think will help. And at the same time, Nestlé sent a clear message to all suppliers saying, well, in a few years' time, all contracts, we will be mandatory to do that. So we get prepared now because that's not going to be negotiable in few years' time. And I think that's where we were not in a position to select suppliers. We were saying we are going to bring the sector because in any case, we can't select suppliers. We have to work with all of them. And the idea is not to say, oh, this one is better than this one. The idea is to say, okay, this one is better of this than the other one, but I want to bring all of them together. Okay, so that was the approach. And I think I want to highlight an interesting aspect that was mentioned this morning, this connection. David said it very well, is relationship with suppliers. For me, the main change was this change completely, drastically, relationship with supplier. We were talking about long-term contracts. We were not talking about only prices. You know, prices was the main driver, quality as well, but now we have an additional criteria. And this was very, very obvious. So you mentioned that, and we show that with the years of the photos. It's not really a sprint, it's a marathon. So that's also about getting knowledge, getting skills for farmers, and also addressing the potential lower yields. You were showing higher yields here, but I think there's also potential of lower yields in other regions. I will make it fast. I really enjoyed some of the words said this morning, because a collective for me, and we didn't agree up front, but it was what worked was a territorial approach. And I think I will connect that with kind of a community that you said before. For me, it was in France, so a very different area, but it was mobilizing all stakeholders at the same on an area, a region. So it means all end users like Danone, like McDonald's, whatever, but also public authorities, NGOs, agricultural chambers, scientific communities. So all that is much more effective. So that's my learning. And I'll just finish with that. I also enjoyed the fact that you said that it's not one size fits all. And why is that? I have just a few examples. For me, the really examples I discussed with my suppliers. Okay, we need to adapt cover crops during winter. Good. It's feasible in Brittany, but it's not feasible in Belgium, where the soil type requires tillage in late November. Another example, and I will finish on that, is reduced tillage before planting. Yes, it's possible, but more for flowering vegetables like broccoli, like cauliflower, but it doesn't really work with carrots, you know. Or last example is organic fertilizer rather than chemical fertilizers. Yes, it can work for leguminous crops, it can work for root vegetables where you can do a 50-50, but for some others like spring vegetables, the release of nitrogen is too slow if you go for organic, so maybe you go for 25-75. Just to say that providing technical, educational, and financial support was one of the, I think, game changer.
Thank you very much for these super interesting interventions. I would like to get back to Tewodros actually first, because I think the key challenge that we see is, so we have these sort of, it is possible, you know, there are local initiatives that are already being deployed. I think one of the key challenges is how do we connect the buyers that are often far away from the smallholder farmers, and how do we scale these initiatives? So I would be curious to hear from you, Tewodros. So how do you see from your experience, what is needed to scale such projects? And how can they also be connected to these global markets?
Yeah, thank you very much. Regarding scaling, it really needs, especially in land restoration, even though the benefits are much higher, it has also a cost implication. So that needs also partnership and collaboration. Farmers, communities do have their own resources, but it's not sufficient. So they have to be supported. It needs also broader understanding and knowledge, so that where research should also come up, especially this time, everything is changing more frequently because of climate change, because of many factors. So farmers need to have also kind of updated information, and then also understanding on how to do the best practices. Farmers need to be trained. And then, of course, the biggest thing is they have to be organized. So they need also kind of policy frameworks that enable them to also establish their own local institutional capacities and also get an autonomy, so that the more at lower level that the people are well organized and understand how to do it, that would be the fastest we can really go in a very short time. So that needs also partnership from development partners, supporting them through finances, through capacity development, and also providing them a framework of conditions that enables them to really take mandate and ownership and responsibility for what they are doing. Yeah. Into marketing, we do have one interesting example. In these areas where the farmers were just cutting all the trees because they don't have any other option, we try to organize and then to some training on exchange, experience exchange and everything. And they try to engage in kind of non-destructive business. The best example was honey production. So honey production, it goes also in line with this vegetation increase, biodiversity and the like. So these farmers, we organize them in a kind of producers group cooperatives. And also we link them into the value chains, which already have existed. So the marketing of the product, it needs also kind of consumer awareness and also providing them kind of the special product certification that helps them to go into possible markets. Those communities we know, they have been also exporting to Europe even as as part of the slow food program. So that gives them more energy to engage into non-destructive businesses, getting more benefit, more income, and then also protecting the environment. So these are the things that should be worked out. So it's at a policy level, at research, technology, science, and also at kind of organizational aspect that needs community to create kind of local organizations for a collective ownership and responsibility.
Thank you. I would like to move to Julien to sort of build on the question of scale, because you're a supplier that has already sort of started the journey. So what would you need to scale?
And as I said, definitely we've got two paths. There's a short term because there is emergency. We have to scale up many actions to see the intensity in carbon and in footprint in the products to be reduced. We need to get faster, and to get faster, we need to get a frame. It's quite identified what can be done to reduce the carbon footprint or the environmental footprint of our products. It is quite identified how to do it. Now we need to work together. Nutriset can do some things, but alone it will be limited, definitely. We need to work with the major NGOs, UN agencies, and research institutions that already worked on that, because there is so much to do, but we need a frame to do that, meaning to get everyone saying, okay, this is a way to claim what you do, what you need to do, because there is a greener plumpy nut with very low premium costs. But also, if we want to be at the right scale, probably there will be overcosts on some raw materials, either location, because we buy it from a new place, which is with lower yield or higher price, or we decide to go to another raw material instead of the dairy ingredients or the palm oil, and the cost is different. So I think definitely the most important now is to work not alone, but to work together, as it was said this morning, because we're not alone. It's a sector matter. It's not only Nutriset, it's not only Plumpyfield with the different members located in some countries where the needs are higher, but it's also a matter of discussion with our competitors, with all kinds of NGOs to see, okay, this is the first priority we should work on, and this is the needs in terms of means.
Thank you. Thomas, moving over to you, what is your perspective on scale, and how do you also see the role of humanitarian organizations in supporting, moving towards suppliers or other alternative products and scaling up this greening humanitarian food supply chains?
I mean, I think it's an iterative process. I mean, we have 26,000 vendors, so it does take us time to move in these directions. I'm encouraged to feel a bit like we're on the right path when I listen to the other panelists, because there, many of these things that are being talked about are things that World Food Program is taking up, but it's at a pace that's probably needs to be accelerated. If I can actually say something about the way we've been driven and costed in the past, has got a lot to do with that. We've been operating under a paradigm that you do everything at the lowest possible cost. And I think that this paradigm is now shifting, and that environmental compliance is changing in terms of the way our donors look at the work that we do, and that I think it'll soon be conditional on funding as well. So I can feel a shift happening now. The more and more questions are being asked of us. I don't think we've been pushed to that degree, but I think that that the next phases will be us actually, asking and demanding that we can actually do better if we have the kind of funding that's available, and if we have the kind of private public partnerships that will allow us to come up with solutions to help further green the supply chain, and that sort of old paradigm of lowest possible cost for everything needs to be rethought, because it is damaging, and we can do much better. Super happy. I need to give a bit of a shout out to Tewodros and the work that's been done in Ethiopia as well. I've worked twice there. I've seen the work that's transformative in terms of the environmental impact, and it does take time. I mean, that's the probably one of the problems. Is that these programs are super successful, but they do take many years to have an impact. But what an impact they can have. So I mean, I really want to congratulate Gebreegziabher on that, because those are just the kind of programs we'd like to see replicated in many parts of the world that have similar environmental pressures being put upon them. Over.
Thanks, Thomas. I would like to shift perspective a little bit, because now we talked about sort of, what are the alternatives, how to engage with suppliers. But at least some organizations also have agricultural programs, or programs in general. So how can you also integrate this this perspective of sort of greening the supply chain, building local resilience in the programming of activities? So I would like to ask Kathrine to react on the question.
Sure, thanks, Sonia. No, indeed, I think it was what I alluded to earlier on. It's really about going back a little bit to thinking about the needs and asking ourselves the question, how do we answer this need in the best way possible, considering cost, social impact, and environmental impact. And it's about adding this environmental impact or environmental protection frame and resilience frame into the design of our programs. What I've seen in the ICRC is that many teams do it naturally, but they don't take those decisions because it protects the environment. They take those decisions because the program ultimately is better for the populations that we serve. And I think that that's a key aspect in making this possible, is really training our minds in thinking maybe a bit differently about how to answer some of the needs. So yes, product alternative is one example. If we give the populations that we serve a greater variety in terms of the food that we provide, our program is ultimately better, and the people we'll serve have access to better nutrition, more acceptable foods that they're used to eat. So it's really about thinking at that level of what are the needs, what are the impacts, and what are the resilience? How can I enable their resilience? Very recently, I was talking to our teams in Colombia, and they were providing food assistance to a community very remote that's usually completely isolated from external input. They live off from the little bit of agriculture and the little bit of forest and what they have access to. But the conflict had cut them off from their lands. And so the ICRC went in to provide them food over the little time until they could go back to their agricultural land and the forest. And what the teams told me is when they came in only via boat and stuff, so very remote, they realized that these populations had never seen packaging. They didn't even know the concept of waste because they don't get products in. And that's what pushed the teams to actually think about how to use or what to do with the waste that their aid was going to generate. So it's not about, yes, it's an environmental impact, but in this case, it's a very acute social impact that we need to come in and think about.
Thank you. I would have many, many more questions for you, but we're running out of time. So I'm gonna open the floor. First of all, I'm wondering, are there any questions online first? Yeah. Maybe someone can pass the mic. Sorry, on my phone. Okay. So there's Peter Schmid, a question for Kathrine. How do you decide when it is okay to distribute food that is more eco-friendly, but perhaps not the first choice for the targeted vulnerable population? So the question of cultural acceptance, local habits, and how do you balance that with potentially more environmentally friendly options?
I don't think we balance it in the sense that I think what we do is always based on what's socially acceptable in the country and to the populations. And the reason is that we know that if we don't do what's culturally acceptable, people will take the food and go back to the market and exchange it for whatever they get as value on the market. So, and that doesn't help our environmental impact, right? I mean, I think reducing our environmental impact is also about being as efficient as possible. And in that case, it's not efficient to give non-culturally acceptable food. But I think what we see is also the importance of being prepared to answer some of these questions. So there's lots that you can do in understanding the market and what is locally produced and locally available. There's a lot that you can do about understanding what is culturally acceptable beyond rice, so that when you need to go in and be fast and answer an emergency, you actually have partially answered some of these questions. And then it's a work between the programmatic, the métiers, the economic security coordinator in the field, and the logistics division sitting in, locally, regionally, or globally here in Geneva, It's about them discussing how best to answer the need, given the other, other constraints on delivery time, cost, etc. So it's always a case by case. But I think there was a little bit what Gilles also referred to this morning when he talked about how we built our environmental roadmap. Well, the key principle was that it's not about going against our capacity to act. It's about supporting our capacity to act always.
Excellent. Thank you. Any questions from the floor? I saw there was a hand. That's first on the left. And if you could also just state your name and eventually organization you come from, and please do keep your questions rather sweet.
Okay. Mary Jane Beer, I'm with InnoSuisse. I already spoke before. Sorry, I have so many questions. One is about how can the Ministry of Agriculture in different countries be involved in nature swaps involving regenerative agriculture, so something like this, or tax incentives for communities going for restoration, or in the case of like rice, we heard about rice, I'm so interested, I didn't know about this, replacement of shifting crops, or so basically all kinds of different solutions. How can the higher level Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Environment, how can they work together to deal with some new tax incentives, right, linked to nature swaps for debts? That's one question. And the other question is about, are there working groups that could like develop something like standards or labels for different kind of foods needs for different needs? So I understood there's food crisis needs, there's war zone needs, there's different needs depending on what is the problem, and perhaps you could have different organizations, even companies that are involved in providing value in the supply chain, involved in the discussion in different working groups, providing their knowledge and helping to develop some sort of standards or labels that then could at least create some standardization in the market. I just wanted to know, maybe those that work on the bee coaching for bee labeling and so on could speak about that. Thank you.
And we're going to take, there was another question, and we're going to take it as well.
Yes, hello, Matteo from the Master Program, University of Geneva. There's been evidence about and people pushing towards direct cash transfers. I want to know from the food security, environmental impact, and local bottom-up approach, which are disadvantages and advantages that you have found of pushing towards this rather than in kind.
Thank you. We can take one more question. Are there any more questions? Okay, great. I would reverse the order. I would like to start with the cash transfer question. Kathrine, Thomas, who would like to react? Thomas.
I can start and then let my colleagues in the panel augment. I mean, that's always a very tough one. I mean, when it comes to certain kinds of conditions, increasingly we're finding cash transfers to be more efficient. They provide a higher degree of dignity to clients. They provide typically an opportunity to buy culturally accepted foods, and foods often with a higher nutritional value. Our food baskets don't include fresh foods, and cash transfers allow those to take place. So there are many upsides to cash transfers. There are some conditions, however, particularly in challenged markets, where it's not appropriate. Often post-disaster, where markets are not functioning well, they've been disrupted, or sometimes in conflict where there's shortages, we find that cash transfer simply doesn't provide much, particularly when there's super inflated prices, because those are conditions where prices are quite inflated. And so that's the challenge that we often weigh out. Sometimes we might have a donor who's given us money to procure food locally. So there are a variety of reasons to balance those things out. But you're absolutely right. I mean, increasingly cash transfers are a way that we're all looking at it. But there are conditions when it is simply not appropriate. Over.
Kathrine, do you want to react?
Yes, sure, and I mean, fully agree with what Thomas just outlined, and the very good reasons why I think increasingly humanitarians are shifting from in-kind and towards more cash-based interventions. There has been a few studies on the link between cash-based interventions and environmental impact or protection. And I'm not going to try and recall all of the conclusions. I think what I took away from it is, one, the environmental impact of cash is very dependent on where you distribute the cash and for what purpose. But you also could integrate environmental preservation as an objective when you think about cash-based interventions. And I think that is a fantastic opportunity when you think about cash, but you need to think about it earlier on and early on in your program design. And I think that's maybe the key thing for any of our organizations ultimately, and maybe even any of us, is we need to just integrate environmental management, environmental protection, or environmental impact into the decisions that we make daily. And that includes the decision that delegates in the field make when they decide to go for in-kind or cash. There are many social impact reasons, there is cost efficiency, there is market reasons, and there should be environmental reasons. And you weigh all of that and you make the best possible decision. So it's about really integrating that into our decision-making processes. And I guess roles of Thomas or mine in humanitarian organization is trying to provide the answers or the support to the colleagues to find the right answers to some of these questions so that they can make the most informed decision.
Thank you. And then I think, Bastien, maybe you would be in a good position to answer the question around standards, labels. Is there something already out there that can be used? Kathrine mentioned RSPO before, but is there already something that buyers can basically rely on that is a bit more standardized and facilitates it for a buyer?
Mm-hmm. In certain crops, RSPO definitely. That's for palm oil. For it's here. I would say there for many years. For the rest, so you can have very specific. Coffee. Rainforest Islands Alliance will give also some kind of a guarantee, or there are different organizations over there. However, I believe that as we said, it's not a standard. And it's not one size fits all. So it's very difficult to rely on one standard, and there's not any standard at the moment. And what matters is dialogue, is the work done on the field to make it really workable for the place where it is done, for the crop that is growing there, and for the conditions of the soil, of the weather, of whatever. So I think it will be difficult. I think what will make a big difference in the future is that if you can connect directly the gain on CO2 you gain on the field, and you kind of make the link directly to the ones who is selling the final consumer, the final good. And there, if you can capture this CO2 gain and have, I would say, a digital tool that will help you to say, okay, this typically I gain whatever 100 kilos there of CO2, and I can make a link that it will be in this product, and I'm going to pay for that. And that's how, for me, it will make a difference in the future.
Thank you. And then we had one question regarding basically political support. So a larger question around what are basically also a political framework that is needed to help move on with the transition. Any volunteers who want to react on the question? Yeah.
I can say a word because, as I said, Plumpyfield is a network made of 10 companies. And among these 10 companies, 8 are located in countries we call programmatic countries, where you've got needs of products. And in these countries, the governments, the public institutions are involved in different ways to different extent. And if I just give an example, in Nigeria, we've got our Plumpyfield member there in Kano. Nigeria is a very protective country in terms of customs. So they've got very high custom duties and high rate of taxes if you want to import some raw materials, for instance. So that influences definitely the way you can produce locally. So I don't have the answer of how they should influence to one or another direction, because I just say that, yes, definitely the government has an impact. And as long as there is no discussion on which consequences such level of custom duties, such level of taxes has on the product which is manufactured locally, if there is no this discussion, the consequences are usually not very good, either on the finished product price, so meaning higher price for the program using this product, or for the use of local raw materials sometimes. Sometimes custom duties are very low, pushing to import some raw materials when you've got them locally, higher price. And so we've been working a lot on pushing Plumpyfield members using local raw materials when they are in good volumes and quality. But definitely we're in an environment which is country specific and related to the government decisions.
Excellent. We're almost out of time. I would like to ask you maybe just one sentence to wrap up basically the panel. So in one sentence, because we, of course, there's a lot of other humanitarian organizations listening. So just in one sentence, what would be your advice if a company wants to get, or if an organization wants to get started? So please keep it super short whilst you're thinking, because we haven't prepared that. I'm just going to give a short summary of the discussion before we wrap up with your statements. So I think what we heard is that there's a lot of challenges on the ground from a supplier perspective, from a buyer perspective, and also possibly from a funding perspective. So there's a lot of challenges. We also have to consider other impacts than carbon. I think this was also a point that came out of this panel very strongly. And another point is there's no one-size-fits-all solution, which doesn't help to reduce complexity. Other few points that were made is really moving away from this approach of having going towards the lowest possible cost, which also leads to the question of the role of donors, of funding. I very much like what Thomas said about public-private partnerships. So how can we also connect projects like the one Tewodros is working on with buyers in a more innovative way? And then, also the question of how can humanitarian organizations bring that into their programs and sort of help with local supply chains, building resilience and reducing the impact. So any volunteers for last thoughts, very quickly, one sentences, max 2. Kathrine, give it a go.
Thank you. No, I think my takeaway, and it includes even this further, the discussions of earlier this morning, is a little bit of the power of collaboration, whether it's inside your organization across, teams that do not necessarily always speak together, but then also across organizations. So talk to your suppliers, I think is one of the key messages. Work with your governments or the governments where you work to integrate them into what you want to do.
Thank you. I also share actually what she said. You know, it's the whole thing is about collaborative action. A single organization or a community or others could not really make a difference. So the way we can make a difference is if we collaborate, if we learn each other, if we share our experiences, and then that will bring a stronghold in terms of really transforming the agricultural system and sustainable production. So there is big opportunity also for humanitarian organizations to consider also sustainable production while addressing immediate needs in terms of social crisis. So this is something has to be integrated, and we do have a number of best examples, experiences that we need to scale it up, but scaling it up does mean that we do the same everywhere. So there has to be a closer look, research has to be there to identify what are the key ingredients that we can take it, and then where can we take it also. That's the key message which I would take it, and I'm really happy to hear also from the participants, their experience.
I will make it short. Stakeholder engagement for sure. Upstream, downstream. I think it's about running in setting projects. So really address where you can in your supply chain, upstream and downstream. For me, that's the key message, and not necessarily spend too much time on measuring because we don't have all the answers, but spend time on acting.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, collaboration and working together. But yeah, just one other point is adaptation, because supply chain resilience is very key in the new world which is being shaped. So yeah, resilient work together on relocating supply chain, either at our factory levels to get local suppliers make sense in terms of supply chain resilience, and as well in terms of agriculture, just to be sure that we use and we will use raw materials that will keep growing and will keep being adapted to where they grow.
Thank you. Thomas, we leave you the last word as you were dealing with us online.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm an old logistician and emergency response person, so I do like to keep things simple. And that would be my advice to other organizations on this path is to not let perfect be the enemy of good. And that if a lot of good actions collectively can actually make quite a bit of difference. And so you can actually start your journey in greening your supply chain, making things more sustainable by a collection of smaller items that taken individually may not make a big change, but collectively can, as a way of starting while you look at some of the longer term solutions. So I would say just get started on it. Over.
Excellent. Thank you very much to all of you, and please give a warm applause to our panelists.